What is up, QB List family? It's Brett Ford here with Eric Romoff for another week of Ball Street, the QB List Stock Exchange. We're talking stocks up, stocks down, who to buy low, who to sell high. And we've got a lot to talk about after an exciting week 7. Eric, how was your weekend from a real life standpoint? How was your weekend from a fantasy standpoint?
Oh man, real life standpoint, any day above ground is great by me, great in my book. From a fantasy standpoint, I actually had the inverse of one of my favorite weeks from a few weeks ago. I have a wide portfolio of fantasy leagues and exposure out there, and I won damn near every one of them except for the league of record, the home league that I care about the most this week. And so I'm just sitting there staring at Joe Flacco on my bench or whatever player that might have been enough to put me over the top. So I'm reeling a little bit, trying to figure out how I'm going to climb up the standings in that one in particular. But on balance, great week overall, both in the betting streets and the fantasy streets and on the personal front.
Nice. Very good. Yeah, I feel like this week was weird for me. I split right down the middle. I was a couple rosters where I had Jamar Chase, a couple rosters where I was facing Jamar Chase. Just one of those weeks where you didn't really know what to do with, you didn't know what helped you, didn't know what hurt you, and it just split right down the middle. I went about 500 in my leagues that matter. So it was an okay week. I'll take it. If I can, not lose everywhere, I'm in good shape.
No doubt.
We'll move on to our injury section of the podcast. We'll talk about some guys who took knocks during this week 7, left their games at one point or the other. Most of them injury related. One of them potentially just performance related. We'll start at quarterback. Bryce Young, Michael Penix, Justin Field, and Jaden Daniels all leave the game in their respective outings. Most of them injury related. We think Justin Fields was related to an injury, but there's reports out there that it might not have been so much the injury as it is the Jets kind of just growing tired of his inefficiencies. What are fantasy managers going to do at quarterback? You've got 6 teams on bye this week, and now you've got potentially Jaden Daniels and Bryce Young also looking at missing time. Where are we looking for quarterback?
Yeah, it's a tough scene out there, right? Fortunately, I guess with how the bye weeks fell, a lot of the top flight quarterbacks are still largely available to you. But if you figured you were going to be, streaming likes of Michael Penix or Justin Fields for these bye weeks, you're going to have to make other plans altogether, right? So the good news is there are plenty of quarterbacks that have individually strong matchups or favorable game scripts. So I don't think the bottom falls out entirely, right? But I submitted my rankings over to the QB list earlier today, and I've got guys like Joe Flacco and Jordan Love much higher than I would anticipate. So you might have to plug your nose and play some more kind of middling type quarterbacks to get through this one.
Yeah, are we touching any of the backups that might play instead of these guys? Like, are we looking at a Marcus Mariota or Andy Dalton against the Bills? I don't know if I want to touch that with a 6-foot pole. But Mariota gets the Chiefs on Monday night. I mean, game script, it could work out, but I don't know if I want to go against Spags.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to either as a fantasy manager or as Marcus Mariota himself if I were in his shoes. I mean, there will be circumstances where people have to make that decision. I guess of the 4, sort of presuming that all 4 of them don't play, I would probably err on the side of Kirk Cousins. He gets a pretty juicy matchup against the Miami defense that is doing its best turnstile impersonation out there. Close second to that would be Tyrod Taylor, his matchup in particular, going up against the Cincinnati defense, going on the other side of Joe Flacco, who suddenly has this offense reinvigorated. Those are probably the only 2 kind of dart throw viable options out of the backups here.
Yeah, if Kirk Cousins got points for handing the ball off to the running back, we'd be in really good shape streaming him. Unfortunately, that's not the
Yeah.
case. Although there could be some opportunity for him to maybe hit that quick screen game with Bijan and Algier coming out of that backfield against the sieve of a Miami defense that he will be facing on Sunday. Let's move on to running back injuries. Kendry Miller of the New Orleans Saints went down. We thought that this might increase Alvin Kamara's usage. Didn't really do a lot for him. Where are we going with the Saints offense? It's kind of a weird vibe there.
Yeah, it is a bit of a weird vibe. Honestly, the biggest kind of free radical in the equation, at least from my vantage point, was more to do with the prospect of some of their best talented, most talented players being traded. And at least reporting seems to indicate that they'll probably be hanging around. So because of that, I actually kind of like the Saints defense. Spencer Rattler, the Rat King, someone you could potentially stream this week, getting busy on the ground as a runner as well. With Kendra Miller going out, I mean, logically, it would seem that Alvin Kamara should have Greenfield in front of him to run and kind of get back to that dominant opportunity share that we have grown to know and love from him. But perhaps not. Maybe Father Time is catching up a little bit, and we see them start to work in some additional runners out of that backfield to try to balance out and stave off any injury or simply Alvin Kamara gassing out, right? So you look at last week in particular, 84% of snaps, second highest total on the season had Alvin Kamara. And then all of a sudden, Devin Neal plays 7 snaps. Doesn't sound like a lot, but a 13% snap share. First time that he's seen meaningful work since all the way back in week number 1. So Neal becomes the handcuff slash potential stash target. But I think at least logically, it should be more Alvin Kamara than anything else.
One name I'm a little bit surprised that you didn't mention during that was Taysom Hill. I would not be shocked. I know, but I wouldn't be shocked if Kellen Clemens comes out and lines up Taysom Hill as a halfback just because he's a Swiss Army knife. He can do anything. He's Weapon X or whatever. But I wouldn't be shocked to see Taysom Hill get more snaps at more different positions and get different looks there. Although it is a different coaching staff, so who really knows, right?
Yeah. So far, 9 snaps, 12 snaps, and 9 snaps are the game logs for Taysom Hill. So to your point, right? If he can kind of walk that up to like the 12 to 15 range, and we know we've seen that even in a limited role, a lot of those touches he's getting are of the high value variety, right? So it might be someone to roll the dice with if you're desperate. Might be an interesting way to save some money and get very different, like in a DFS context. But pretty low likelihood spread of circumstances where you're actually clicking the button on Taysom Hill.
Yeah, I mean, maybe for a streaming option, if you've got McBride or Laporta who are on bye this week and you're, scrambling at the waiver wire. Although, if Jawan Johnson's there, I'd rather have him, but we'll see. Speaking of tight end and Bears and Saints game, Cole Kmet also went down with an injury in the same game as Kendry Miller did. Where do we look at tight end? Are we considering Colston Loveland as a potential streaming option?
Yeah, I think you can, right? You mentioned some of the the top tier names that are going to be on bye this week. Another name that managers have also been navigating without since the first couple weeks of the season. Brock Bowers also on the buy list there. So Colston Loveland could certainly become sort of a back end, tight end 18 or so type target. What's interesting with regard to Loveland is obviously the injury to Kmet would pave the way for him, but all of a sudden last week alone, Colston Loveland saw his snap share really flip in his favor. Right, obviously Kmet exited early in that game, but even still, Colston Loveland played 46 snaps in this game. Right, so the arrow has been pointing that direction following their bye. They came out of that week 5 bye. And immediately, Colston Loveland played 42% of snaps. Right now, it jumps up to 67% of snaps. So it seemed like they were trying to find ways to get him on the field more and get him integrated into the offense a little bit more. And now that Cole Kmet is at least presumed to be missing this week 8 game, definitely create some opportunity for him to make the most of this additional playing time.
Yeah, and the thing that I liked most about Loveland is he also ran 17 routes. Third on the team in front of wide receiver 3. I say that wide receiver 3 Olamide Zacchaeus. I don't want to get ahead of myself here, but yeah, it's promising to see the rookies in Chicago starting to get a little bit bigger of a role. And I say that plural. We'll get to that in a little bit. Wide receiver, we had Dontavian Wicks suffer an injury for the Packers, and then on Monday Night Football, we saw Nico Collins evaluated for a concussion in that game against the Seahawks. With Collins going down and so many teams on bye, managers may have to pivot at one or two of their wide receiver spots. Do you have any guidance there as far as like streaming targets or anything like that?
Well, it's probably going to be slim pickings in the Texans offense, right? So the kind of plug and play next man up consideration is a bit moot, just given how much they've struggled to move the ball generally, and the fact that they're heading into a pretty ugly matchup against the San Francisco 49ers this week. The streaming verse on the whole actually looks kind of interesting this week. As I was going through the QB list rankings, I found a lot of guys in that like 30 to 45, 30 to 50 range that felt pretty interesting, right? So Keon Coleman is out there on a lot of benches. He gets a pretty favorable matchup against Carolina. Olamide Zacchaeus, you mentioned him earlier. If Baltimore is going to be the version of that defense we've seen through the first part of the season, certainly don't mind targeting him there as well. Josh Downs potentially could make his way back and gets a juicy matchup against Tennessee. And as you work your way even further down the list, right, you have the amalgam of the Tampa Bay receivers. Tej Johnson would probably be my favorite of the lot to potentially step up and become a worthy wide receiver 3 or flex type option. So even though we're looking at a long list of teams on bye, there's a kind of a log jam at that sort of back end wide receiver 3 range where there are a lot of viable options to go out there and click the button on.
Yeah, another matchup based wide receiver that I'm kind of excited about this week based on just who he's facing and his role in his respective offense is Marvin Mims Jr. Facing the Cowboys this week at home. I like the way that the Broncos have used him to take the top off the defense. Maybe not so much this year. He's a little bit more gadgety, a little bit more short to intermediate, but we've seen him take the top off of defenses. And we've seen Dallas have the top taken off a couple times also. So really excited about Marvin Mims Jr. this week in his matchup in the couple places where I'm scrambling on the waiver wire.
Yeah, don't mind it at all. That Dallas matchup has been one that we've been targeting successfully all season long. And I don't think, maybe absent of like a Max Crosby trade, that's going to change anytime soon.
100% agree. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about some guys that have their stocks falling and could present some opportunities to buy low. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Ball Street, the QB List Stock Exchange. I'm Brett Ford here with Eric Romoff. We are rocking and rolling through guys who have seen their stocks tumble after week 7. And we'll start with one of the biggest names in football, a first round draft capital kind of guy. It's the Philadelphia Eagles running back Saquon Barkley. Barkley struggled again this week. Kind of got the Ashton Genty treatment where he struggled to even get back to the line of scrimmage without taking contact. Would love to see his yards after contact versus his actual yards gained. Probably similar to, maybe not as bad as what we've seen from Genty, but similar to that certainly. Where are you on Barkley and what changes could the Eagles potentially make, or what changes do you anticipate the Eagles making as they face off against the Giants in week 8? And of course, that's a revenge game for them.
Yeah, all of a sudden a revenge game from the Jackson Dart Cam Scattaboo arrival announcement from a few Thursday nights ago. look, I don't think that it necessarily gets incrementally or meaningfully better in terms of what the Eagles can do around Saquon Barkley. I think, look, their O-line certainly lost some pieces. They're obviously one of the older units in the league, but they didn't just immediately turn into a pumpkin after that Super Bowl run last year, right? So I think some of this is both Barkley and the offensive line adjusting to the new scheme and the new system. I think some of this is variance, right? But you look at Saquon Barkley in a vacuum, he's ranked 71st in yards before contact per attempt, 1.8 yards per contact per attempt before contact before he is being met by a defender. Anyone, even one of the most talented rushers in the game, is going to find some difficulty to produce much on the ground if in that circumstance. Honestly, what I think probably moves the needle the most is more of what we saw in that game last week against Minnesota, just getting the ball going down the field, airing it out, introducing or rather reintroducing that more vertical element to this offense is going to pull some of those inbox defenders further away from the line. It's going to make safeties and other members of the secondary play a little bit more honest. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Jalen Hurts start to run a little bit more, right? So all of the bumps in the road that we've seen with Philadelphia, I generally lump into more of a learning curve in the new offense type of reality, and they're going to find their equilibrium before season's end, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, the Eagles have had a good season. The offense has looked better. Certainly last week, the passing game looked way better. But there's still people calling for offensive coordinator Kevin Patullo's head. It isn't, they aren't firing on all cylinders. They have yet
Sure.
in 7 games to fire on all cylinders. So I think there is some growing pains there. I agree with you. And hopefully they get it ironed out for all the Saquon managers out there. Because he's fun to watch. He's good for football when he's succeeding. Now, I don't think we're going to have any backwards hurdles anymore this season, but he's certainly still an explosive runner. And if he can get, maybe some more yards before contact, maybe some better blocking, maybe some better schemed running, we'll see.
Yeah.
But he's definitely someone whose stock has fallen. We'll see what happens. Speaking of falling stocks, the Las Vegas Raiders did not score any points in real life on Sunday, and that is just a sad reality for Raiders fans. 31-0 against the Chiefs. Ashton Genty, Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers didn't even play, but Ashton Genty struggled. Geno Smith struggled. It was just ugly. We saw Kenny Pickett at one point. That's how bad it got. Talk to me about what do we do with, Raiders pieces if we're still holding them?
Yeah, I think for those that are that have rostered any of the meaningful pieces, there's not really much to do, right? They are largely at their bottom basement price tag, so you kind of have to hold unless you find the guy in your league that's just in love with the name value of a Brock Bowers or an Ashton Genty. With regard to Myers, I would anticipate he is sporting a new uniform within a week or two's time. He was one of the more vocal players about wanting a trade heading into the season. He was just prompted again in a media scrum today, asked if he still wanted to be traded, and he said, "Oh, for sure, but I'm still a professional. I'm going to try to play good football, right?" But it would certainly seem likely that he is heading out of town, and just by the statistical representation, he almost has to go to a better circumstance than what we're seeing in this Raiders offense. So certainly a hold for Myers, maybe even a buy low. I honestly wouldn't be mad about buying low on Genty or Bowers as well. It's going to be ugly for the Raiders for the duration in my mind, but these are talented players that should at least have enough of a volume floor to be okay clicking the start button and are skilled enough to where they can reach back and have those spike weeks from time to time.
Yeah. The only thing that could possibly go worse for Jacoby Myers is if he wakes up on Friday morning as a New York Jet. Like that's really the worst thing that could happen.
Yeah. Tough scene.
Speaking of the New York Jets, Justin Fields, just the wheels have fallen off the Justin Fields experiment in New York. They have turned over to Tyrod Taylor, whether by injury or performance remains unclear, I guess. But either way, it looks like Tyrod Taylor will be the starter on Sunday. Fields is just a cut at this point, right?
Yeah, by and large. I mean, don't just spite drop him, right? If there's somebody you want to acquire, then he's certainly droppable. But I mean, if you cut him, he'll probably sit out on the wire and be available to pick up if you ever decide to about face and go out and grab him. I tend to think that this was more merit based than injury, especially with Woody Johnson out in the media, just completely flaming their passing game, and some of the decision making behind Aaron Glenn's player personnel moves. Right, so it certainly seems to be near rock bottom for Justin Fields. Some of this is to be expected, right? You knew when you drafted or acquired Justin Fields, it was going to have its ups and its downs, but I don't think anybody really anticipated the downs being quite as far down as we've seen over these last 2 weeks.
Yeah, it's been ugly, and hopefully for Jets fans, Tyrod Taylor can right the ship. And if he doesn't, who knows? Maybe we will see Fields again later this season, whether it's in a Jets uniform or somewhere else, yet to be seen. But could be an interesting name to watch at the trade deadline. The contract makes it a little difficult, but who knows? He might have fallen out of favor in New York enough to garner a trade. We move on to San Francisco, where tight end George Kittle was back, which was great news for fantasy managers. The only bad news for fantasy managers is he did absolutely nothing, at least from a production standpoint, in the box score. I'll let you talk a little bit about why that might not be entirely truthful. But what do you think about Kittle's performance on Sunday night?
Yeah, as a fantasy manager, not what you're hoping for. As someone who has a lot of George Kittle exposure in fantasy, certainly not the performance that I was hoping for when I gleefully moved him out of IR and into my starting lineup immediately. Turns around and gives you the old goose egg. So it'd be better just playing nobody, or at least equivalent. But I make a face at the idea of him contributing little to nothing, because while he wasn't posting the production, his impact on this offense as a whole is very significant, right? They're able to get the ground game operating the way that they want. Christian McCaffrey, despite all of his lofty fantasy production, hadn't been doing nearly as much as a runner up until week number 7. And this was very much so the unlock for him. And I think if nothing else, George Kittle has earned some grace through his storied and very productive career. It's one game back, but the way that I'm viewing it is the arrow is pointing up on the 49ers offense overall, and that is a high tide that will also raise George Kittle ship for the stretch run.
Yeah, not for nothing. The Falcons defense is, a tough matchup for tight ends, has been historically this season. So I don't think I'm putting much stock in his performance as much as I am the fact that he was on the field for 85% of snaps, right? Like that was good to see, that he appears to be healthy, that he was used so frequently in the run game, in the blocking game. Speaking of running backs, Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, Washington obviously loses Jaden Daniels, which puts a damper on their entire offense. But I think the most concerning thing was the snap share, right? Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt loses his starting quarterback and then loses snaps to Chris Rodriguez and Jeremy McNichols. And you're looking around at your fantasy roster going, wait, do I have the RB1 in Washington anymore?
Yeah, I think you still do if you roster Bill Krosky-Merritt. Much like we're willing to give Kittle a mulligan for the game last week, I'm looking through a similar lens for really the whole of the Commanders' offense last week. This was a competitive game until suddenly it wasn't. Jaden Daniels goes out with a hamstring injury as they were already starting to fall behind from the prolific pace that the Cowboys was setting. worst setting, and then Marcus Mariota comes in and throws a horrific pick, and really the Commanders kind of started to to close up shop for the week, right? In terms of Jakrosky Merritt in particular, while he has been the lead back, this has still been a three-way split throughout the duration of the season. And of those three players, he's one of the least involved in terms of his ability as a pass catcher, right? He's out there averaging a slim few number of targets per week. That's a little bit more the domain of Jeremy McNichols. And in this game where they were trailing significantly, suddenly McNichols saw one of his larger snap shares of the season, right? So I think you can piece together the breadcrumb trail as to how this happened and anticipate a little bit more competitive games ahead for the Commanders, and in turn a return to form for Bill Krosky Merritt.
And that's fair. I think that maybe just him being a rookie, being a little bit more unproven, makes fantasy managers waver a little bit more. But I think your analysis of the situation is probably more accurate than any sort of knee jerk reaction for sure. Let's move into some guys that we might be interested in buying low on. I have a couple names on the show sheet, but I kind of want to hear your thoughts before we start talking about these guys. Where are you finding the most opportunity after week 7?
Yeah, so funny enough, a lot of the names that I have on my short list are also guys that you have here on the show sheet. Really, the only one that I am underscoring that you don't have on here is Garrett Wilson. This is very likely still going to be a heavy centralized Jets offense when he makes his way back. We'll see if it's this week or potentially next week, but he should still completely dominate opportunity and target share when he's back on the field. And the stock for the Jets offense overall is about as low as it's going to get, right? But if you look at Garrett Wilson, going back to that week where Tyrod Taylor was the start, or got the start, I should say, Wilson finished as the wide receiver 2, almost 25 PPR points in that week. While it might not be as pretty and a little bit more turnover prone, Tyrod Taylor very much so knows where his bread is buttered. So if it is him for the stretch run here, I think you will be keeping Garrett Wilson fed, and you can go out and get him at a pretty steep discount, as most people are bearish on the Jets.
Yeah, I think that's a great shout. And I think you're right. Wilson, especially if he's paired with Taylor, I think he could see an uptick in volume, an uptick in catchable targets. Maybe not an uptick in targets, but an uptick in catchable targets for sure.
Yeah.
Another couple elite wide receivers that might have seen a dip in their production recently, where maybe you can get a little bit of a discount. We're looking both of them actually in the NFC North. Rome Odunze for the Chicago Bears, of course, and then Vikings wide receiver Justin Jefferson. Do you have any concerns with either of their volumes starting to slip with, Jordan Addison emerging in Minnesota, with I guess the corpse of DJ Moore coming back a little bit in Chicago, as well as so many mouths to feed there? Any concerns with either of those wide receivers, or are you kind of all in on if you can get a discount, you're going to grab them?
Yeah, both guys that I am targeting aggressively as buy low candidates, right? The consideration with Rome Odunze is a little bit more circumstantial in nature. They've really been targeting him downfield far more often than they were to start the season, right? And so by nature of the ball traveling through the air further, it's a more difficult catch to make, and the completion percentage goes down by a good measure, right? So I think some of this is coming out of the Bears bye week. They're really trying to find the different ways to integrate the multitude of weapons they have available. But once they find their level, I think it's still going to be a circumstance where Rome Odunze is heavily featured, and the Bears head into a pretty handsome stretch of games here, starting with the Ravens, Bengals, Giants. They have the Vikings on there, right? So there are some pretty juicy matchups ahead of Rome Odunze. I think we can get him back into that wide receiver 1 range here in short order. And for Justin Jefferson, I mean, this is the story of touchdown variance, if nothing else, right? Like his opportunity, his workload is exactly what you're looking for. And even as recently as last week, right? If it wasn't for an incredible knockout of what would be a touchdown pass by the Eagles defender. Cooper DeJean is the name that I was searching for. All of a sudden, Justin Jefferson has another reception, another 30-ish yards to add to his total, and a touchdown. And I don't even know if we're talking about him as a potential buy low candidate anymore, right? So Justin Jefferson's workload is really exactly where you want it to be. It's just the touchdown variance hasn't been breaking his way. And statistically, that should normalize to have him finish as a top 5 or 6 option by season's end.
Excellent. I 100% agree on both receivers, and hopefully we see both of them bounce back. And if that's the case, hopefully you can acquire them before that happens. Talking about running back, we talked about this team earlier in the podcast in the injury section, but Alvin Kamara is a name that kind of keeps popping up in the stock down section, but he's a guy who I'm kind of curious in, especially if Kendry Miller is going to miss any time. The Saints have been one of the faster paced teams as far as like tempo and play style. I wish he was a little bit more involved in the passing game like he has been previously in his career. He seems to have dipped there. But what are your thoughts on Kamara, and what opportunities are you seeing across the fantasy landscape?
It's an interesting one. So to your point on Kendra Miller, he has torn his ACL. He is out for the season. So this very much so opens up, or at least changes the circumstance for Alvin Kamara. Logically, it would seem like they would keep him fed, and we would see a workload akin to that of week 7, where all of a sudden he's getting 85% of snaps roughly. And if that's the case, right, if you can subscribe to that line of thinking, you can very much so go capitalize on what's been kind of a sluggish start to the season as Kamara sits as running back 21 currently. So I think it's worth it to float some offers out there. He should offer a decent floor. And if they decide to overload him, now that upside is unlocked. So I don't mind targeting Alvin Kamara on the cheap in light of this Kendra Miller news.
Excellent. Well, that takes us to the end of our buy low section. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk stock up, who we might be selling high, and who we are also holding and buying high as well. We'll be back after this. Welcome back to Ball Street, the QBL Stock Exchange. Buy low, sell high. That's business on Ball Street. Before you go anywhere, make sure to check out QBList.com, one of our weekly columns. The What We Saw column is your weekly shortcut to smarter fantasy football decisions. The QB List team of analysts watches every NFL game and goes beyond the box score to deliver the most important observations, providing actionable, contextual insights that help shape your next lineup move. Make sure to check us out on QBList.com and in the fantasy football subreddit every Monday morning. Don't forget all of QB List's weekly web content, including the Start Sit column, weekly rankings. We've had multiple top 10 rankings across the industry on Fantasy Pros a few times in the last few weeks. We've expanded the QB List podcast network. Jay Felicio, our lead analyst, does Sunday Best. Brian Hartman and the crew are on the Waiver Wire show, the weekly forecast. And, of course, you're listening to Ball Street. Check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/theqblist, where we're posting all of our podcast recordings, and follow us on our newest platform, TikTok, at QB_list. Eric, you were one of those top 10 rankers a couple weeks ago, were you not?
I was. I made my way into the top 10, and breaking news, I was a hair's breadth away. I finished as number 15 in week number 7. Number 1 ranker in running backs, though, which I was a bit surprised by. I wasn't feeling too great reshuffling those down to the wire, but process prevails, and now we've got, I think it's 4 top 25 finishes on the board for the QB List ranking team. So far, so good. Make sure you're following those along. We're putting out good work for y'all.
Yeah, you guys do a great job on a weekly basis. Consistent. That's what we like to see. Those multiple, top 25s, starting to feel the groove, get into our groove and find the flow. Consistent top rankings. We love to see it. Speaking of running backs, Chase Brown and Jaylen Warren on Thursday night. both looked pretty good as the Bengals and Steelers both had a solid run game going. I think the thing that I noticed the most was how dominant Jalen Warren was as far as usage and snap share. We very rarely saw Kenneth Gainwell. We did not see Caleb Johnson at all. What are your thoughts on those two running backs as far as where their stocks have risen to after week 7?
Yeah, it's starting to solidify, right? For a while, it seemed like it was going to be a big old mess with both the returning Warren, the free agent that they acquired in Kenneth Gainwell, and their early draft capital that they spent on Caleb Johnson. Right? Keep in mind, they sent their second round pick to go get DK Metcalf, so their third round pick was essentially their second decision, their second choice name off their board. So it seemed like there was going to be this three-headed monster, and it was going to be real ugly, and then some missteps, some poor pass pro, some bad decisions. And now all of a sudden, Jalen Warren is commanding a 2/3 share in this backfield and seems to be the preferred option of the very particular Aaron Rodgers about what personnel is around him as a pass protector and as an option in the run game. So definitely like the way that the arrow is pointing for Jalen Warren. I think, Caleb Johnson is pretty much welcome to Dumpsville. Shout out 06010. Certainly a guy that you can cut if you need to find someone to plug into your lineup in the week 8 with all of the buys.
Oh, we'll stay in that Thursday night game. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Flacco, 100% back, right? Like we're just firing on all cylinders with the Bengals offense now that the elite Joe Cool is under center.
It certainly seems that way, right? That first week against Green Bay, I believe it was, had its ups and its downs. He admitted after the game on the short week, I think he flew into Cincinnati like 3 days before kickoff, that he was kind of winging it out there and didn't exactly know the full breadth of the playbook. But here, after a week of practice and a week in the system, completely unlocked the potential that we were all hoping for when they made that trade. And if nothing else, understood the assignment, right? Like, screw it. Jamar Chase is down there somewhere, gets peppered with 23 targets from Joe Flacco, third most targets by a player since targets started being recorded as a statistic in 1992. So, I mean, the arrow is absolutely pointing up in a game script that I don't think anyone saw shooting out that way. So for those that held strong, for those that went out and bought low on the Bengals pieces, you have to be feeling pretty good about the direction that your investment looks to be heading.
Yeah, as someone who watched closely what Flacco was doing both in Cleveland and Cincinnati on Thursday night, it was very clear in Cleveland that the game plan was just short West Coast style throws, and we're not going to air it out. We're not going to, we're going to try to just piecemeal down the field. And it felt very much like that offense, that scheme had kind of neutered Flacco. Like it was kind of like he wasn't allowed to play to his own strengths. Whereas I feel like Zach Taylor in Cincinnati is allowing him very much to do that. Basically saying, hey, man, we know you can throw it around. We know you can read a defense. We have elite athletes on the perimeter. We're going to put them in positions to just basically beat the guy across from them. And we're trusting you to deliver them the ball wherever they are.
Yeah, I mean, shout out to Joe Flacco. Like, this late career renaissance has been so fun to watch, and it's been really cool to see the way that his game has evolved. Right, like when he was winning a Super Bowl and somewhat tongue in cheek part of the elite quarterback conversation, he would have fit perfectly in that Kevin Stefanski offense from a few weeks ago. Right, like that was right down the fairway for him. But now on this revenge tour, he's uncorking it. Right, like he loves chucking up these YOLO balls. He loves taking big shots. I think some of that is just a sense of nothing to lose. I think some of that is just increasing confidence in his abilities. But moreover, the reason why I want to give this man flowers is he's trying to win, right? With that defense that Cleveland rolls out there every single week, if you're just keeping the offense on time and on target, you will be competitive in a lot of games, right? Cincinnati, he comes in and he knows that his defense is roughly as strong as a wet paper bag, and he's going to have to air this thing out if he wants to win games. Because ultimately, I think on this, on the tail end of his career, he just wants to try to post as many wins as he can because that's fun to do when you're a 40-plus-year-old quarterback.
Yeah, one of the most fun interviews that I've seen was them talking to him post game and basically saying, "Hey man, like why are you still here? What do you do? Like what are you doing?" And he's like, "Man, my kids are old enough to like understand what's happening. This is like the coolest thing ever because his kids are,
Yeah.
he's got like a 12-year-old, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old. I mean, he's like Phillip Rivers out there with 6 of them, or I think it's either 4 or 5.
Pulling the van around.
Yeah, right. But he, the just seeing him kind of enjoy playing in front of his kids and his kids get to understand what's happening. Like, wow, dad's an NFL quarterback. This is cool. Like,
It's sick.
it's special. Especially as a Ravens fan, I had a soft spot for Joe, regardless of how many AFC North rivals he plays for.
He's gathering them like Infinity Stones, right?
If Rodgers retires this offseason and I'm
Say
not
he
even going to
wouldn't.
put it into the universe. I'm not even going to put it out in the
Say
universe.
there's not a more Mike Tomlin decision to make than a 42-year-old Joe Flacco to buy them one more year before they have to make a real quarterback decision.
Please don't, Joe. We move on to a couple more running backs. Let's talk DeAndre Swift and Kyle Monangai. Kyle M. The Bears backfield, 200 yards rushing combined. I mean, both those guys, just every time they touch the ball, were scooting. And they did it against the Saints, who haven't been terrible against the run. But Chicago basically just handed the ball off and just ran down the field with it. I'm looking at their box score now. DeAndre Swift finished with 124 rushing yards on 19 carries. Monangai finished with 81 yards on 13 carries. Each of them rushed for a touchdown. Talk to me about the Bears backfield and what do we do here?
For those that rostered them or started them, you pat yourself on the back because these were guys that were in Monangai's case left undrafted. In DeAndre Swift's case, kind of fell into that prototypical running back dead zone that we all hear about over the course of draft season, and are paying dividends. Obviously, Swift in a more sustainable fashion than we've seen with Monangai, but the change in my mind is really with regard to Kyle Monangai, right? It was an open question if it's going to be him, if it's going to be Roschon Johnson, if it's going to be some combination of the two as the primary backup to DeAndre Swift. And over these last handful of weeks, it seems like Monangai's really grappled that job away, right? Last week saw his peak snap share and opportunity share capping out at 31 snaps, 45% of opportunities. Some of this needs to be taken with a grain of salt, right? This was an absolute blowout game. So the Bears offense looks good. They're not going to be blowing people out to the extent they were with the Saints. But if nothing else, it is a crystal clear and loud signal in terms of the pecking order in the Bears backfield. And that's clarity that we didn't have heading into the bye week, right? So Monangai is going to be a coveted asset and acquisition target as we head into waivers this week. DeAndre Swift still looks to be one of the better values as like a fringe RB2 guy with weekly RB1 upside.
Excellent. Let's move on to a couple pass catchers who had great week 7s. Both of them rookies, actually. So that works out in our favor as well. Jacksonville wide receiver Travis Hunter Jr. saw his production explode this week. And then in Los Angeles, Aronde Gadsden III at tight end, kind of a name that, some fantasy circles had kind of highlighted coming into this week, but, by and large, a relative unknown as far as production goes up to week 7. Talk to me about Hunter and Gadsden and their meteoric rise or their explosiveness in week 7 and whether it's sustainable for both.
I think it might be. I was a little bit more concerned about Travis Hunter specifically coming out of that win against Kansas City a few weeks ago because he was seeing more time on the field, but a lot of his looks were downfield, and there were kind of 50-50 balls, or maybe even like 60-40 the other way balls that he had to go jump up and come back and make a miraculous catch on. And it just didn't seem like they were using him in intelligent ways. And man, they made me eat those words in week 7. They got him involved all over the formation. They got him a variety of different looks, both as the first read and as check down options, or as secondary options in the progression. He finds his way into the end zone for the first time in his rookie career as a pass catcher. Now, the narrative seems to be crystal clear on him, right? You go back to week number 3, specifically his offensive snap counts, 53% increases to 57 to 65 to 79 to 87. So he very much so is launching into a full-time offensive player. And that was always the knock on him, right? If we knew he was going to be a wide receiver first, he would be a huge target in terms of fantasy drafts. Now we're starting to get that answer. The buy low window might be kind of slammed shut on him based on the productivity last week. But if you can still get him for, 90, 85 cents on the dollar, I wouldn't mind that at all. Gadsden was a really interesting case because he was someone that, was able to make his hay sort of out of nowhere, and specifically in games where the Chargers receiving core was hobbled. Then all of a sudden last week in Indianapolis, he gets 9 targets, 7 receptions, 164 yards, and a score with Keenan Allen available, with Quentin Johnston back, with Ladd McConkey on the field. So he's not just feasting on guys being injured and being able to take advantage of those looks. He is making a place for himself in this offense, even when they're at full strength.
Yeah, I saw somebody on Twitter call him Aronde Gateston. I thought that was a little bit early on the Antonio Gates comparison there, but he certainly looked like it in week 7.
Yeah, you see a massive individual running through, running up the seam and bodying people for touchdowns, and it's hard not to think back to those Antonio Gates days for sure. Hope I think he can carry it on too. He's in a good spot.
Excellent. So we talked about some guys whose stocks have risen after their week 7 performances. There are several more, obviously, that we didn't cover. Some of those are guys that we are saving for the sell high section. I have a couple names on the show sheet once again. But Eric, before I get into those, where are you looking to possibly cash in on some peak values across the fantasy landscape?
Yet again, we are in lockstep with regard to a lot of the names that you have pointed to. The only one that I had written down that you did not is Ramondre Stevenson. I refuse to believe that a New England Patriots team that spent the draft capital they did to bring in a talent such as Trevion Henderson is going to let him wither and die on the bench, as they are in the midst of legitimately winning the AFC East for the first time in half a decade or so. So Ramondre Stevenson, even though he's fumbling every time that you turn around, seems to be getting the majority of the workload. He's certainly getting the touchdown opportunity. And I think that if people believe that the story is written as to how the Patriots are going to use their running backs, and that story is one that heavily features Ramondre Stevenson, you can probably sell that person, Ramondre Stevenson, for a bit more than he's worth. So trying to shop him around anywhere that I have access to him on my rosters.
That's fair. And it's a guy who there might be, I feel like he's very polarizing as far as the fantasy landscape goes. There are Ramondre Stevenson believers out there that I think if you're one of those managers that got him in that RB dead zone, you could sell high. Who are some names that are out there that you might be considering like shopping around, like Ramondre Stevenson for like a DeAndre Swift?
Yeah, I would love to go to there. I don't know if you could pull DeAndre Swift for Ramondre Stevenson, honestly. Some of that is just, it's difficult to make same position 1-for-1 swaps, right? You just kind of have to find the guy that likes your dude more than he likes his dude, right? And so in turn, not necessarily a likely outcome, but one that I would love. I would look more into the wide receiver ranks, right? Zay Flowers type would be interesting to me. A Lad McConkey type would be interesting to me. Guys that are kind of up and down, or their stock is sort of all over the place. Alternatively, if you got Ramondre Stevenson at cost during draft season, he might not even be one of the guys that you're starting every single week, right? So maybe you try to upgrade at a tight end position and get a depth piece back at running back, or upgrade your quarterback and get depth running back in return. Something along those lines is a little bit more what would tickle my fancy.
Excellent. Yeah. And I love when we can kind of dip into trade strategy as well.
Sure.
That's always helpful when we can talk about that a little bit. So thank you for that. A couple other guys that I'm looking at selling high on, Zach Charbonnet. Zach Charbonnet is one who I feel like is kind of a similar situation to New England, where it's not the guy with the talent that's the one getting the opportunity. And obviously, we're not at practice every day. We don't see everything, but on the surface, Kenneth Walker III seems like the more talented running back, in the same way that Travion Henderson seems like the more talented running back. But that's not the way that the usage is playing out in Seattle, with Charbonnet getting all the goal line carries, even on Kenneth Walker's birthday. Unbelievable.
Completely wild. Like, certifiably crazy behavior for this coaching staff to not give Kenneth Walker any of the goal line touches on his birthday on Monday Night Football, right? Like, we do our best to warn against any of the narrative street analysis. But also, at the end of the day, like, these are people, right? These are people that you have to work with and you forge relationships with. And if they're not going to throw this guy a bone on that of all days, like, whatever confidence you might have that they warm up to him has to be pretty well muted. At least it is for me, right? I think we're going to see a lot of what we've seen so far through Seattle, which is a near split, right? Maybe a little bit more work going to Kenneth Walker's direction, but all of the goal line and red zone work being carved off for Zach Charbonnet, as well as much of the passing down work because of the proliferation of PPR or half PPR scoring. That makes Zach Charbonnet a little bit more of the appealing asset, but a player that you're not going to be happy about starting unless he finds his way into the end zone 2 times, like he did on Monday Night Football. So if you can find a manager who thinks that this was the Zach Charbonnet coming out game and his 2 touchdowns are going to sustain, then by all means move off to him. Even for a guy that might not have as much flash or upside, but has a much more steady baseline of production, would be the type of exchange I would look to make for Charbonnet.
Excellent. We'll get into another kind of polarizing name. He's been one of the absolutely elite tight ends this year. That's Jake Ferguson for Dallas. Had a massive game against the Commanders this weekend, and it feels like, with Lamb coming back and Ferguson still performing, that maybe he's peaking at value, that maybe managers could get a bigger return for Ferguson than they might think.
I think that is a correct way to look at it. I've been the sicko that has been suggesting we should sell Jake Ferguson for a while now, right? One, basing your productivity off of touchdowns is always going to be a bumpy road, right? Credit to him, he's been sustaining it. But then the return of CD Lamb, really marks, in my mind, a line of demarcation. This week in particular, certainly made me eat those words, right? Finds his way to the end zone a couple of times. I think this is a little bit more of the outlier variety, right? We talked earlier about how Washington essentially folded up shop around the midpoint of the game, and Dallas was able to just continue to impose their will. So I think this is very much so a sell high opportunity. I don't think you have to go move off of him. Sometimes when I suggest a player is to be sold high, some people will receive it as, oh, you need to get rid of this guy. He's going to completely crumble. Not the case, right? If you are starting Jake Ferguson every single week for the rest of the season, you're probably doing just fine. But If you find someone who's in love with him and he will give you back a startable caliber asset in return, probably worth a long, hard look at that offer, if nothing else.
Yeah, there are probably a handful of managers out there who have Ferguson and another startable tight end like a Tucker Kraft or a Tyler Warren maybe. Both of those guys going in the mid to late rounds in drafts. If you have Ferguson or one of those guys on your bench every week, make a trade, make a move, improve your starting lineup. Depth is great, but at the end of the day, bench points don't count for anything.
100%. And specifically at the tight end position, right? There are some elite names out there, guys that will get you 13, 15, 16 points a week, right? But after those 4 or 5 guys, everyone is essentially getting you 3 or 4 catches for about 35 yards. And the difference is if they make their way into the end zone or not. So you don't like to see depth going out the door. But worst case scenario, your starter gets injured and you're shopping in the tight end streaming land. You're essentially just keeping pace with the pack because you're very likely to get another guy who can catch 3 balls for 40 yards like your opponent guy.
And who knows, maybe you'll catch lightning in a bottle with a guy like Oronde Gadsden.
Yeah, feeling real good about that. Ride the lightning with Darren Waller for 2 weeks, right? That's fine. Then on to the next one.
Oh, we're running out of time here, so we're going to skip ahead to the buy high or hold section. Who are guys that you are most interested in acquiring at their current value that might be even, an overpay, or if they are on your roster, you are absolutely holding?
This is a guy that is largely, in the case of the latter, is well represented on my portfolio of exposures. Jackson Smith-Njigba. We absolutely were bullish on him heading into the season. There was some concern about whether or not Sam Darnold would turn back into the seeing ghost version of Sam Darnold. And it looks like he is as comfortable here as he was in Minnesota. And moreover, the way that they're using JSN in this Kubiak offense, both on the outside, both as a vertical option, as a first read target, and the anticipation and rapport that he's built with Sam Darnold in such a short order of time, he is easily my favorite if I had to pick right now as the guy to finish as wide receiver 1 on the 2025 season. And I don't think it's particularly close.
Yeah, I'll agree with you. I think JSN, especially after doing it in prime time where everybody saw it, or at least West Coasters did, it was a 10 p.m. start time on the East Coast. But where more people saw the performance, there's more of a potential to receive trade offers for JSN.
Yep.
Don't do it. Like you unless you are absolutely positively overwhelmed by talent in return, hold on to JSN, please.
This is the returns should dictate that, right? This another ceiling game against Derek Stingley, one of, if not the best cover corners in all of the NFL. But also, like, this game is supposed to be fun. And I can tell you, I am having more fun watching JSN play, knowing that I have a smattering of rosters. So you might get a little bit more talent back in return, but just the sheer joy of watching an elite receiver come into his prime like this is a rare opportunity that we all get to experience together.
I love that. And that's what fantasy football is about. It's about having fun, like you said. So keep JSN on your roster and have fun with it. That does it. That's all time we have for Ball Street, the QB List Stock Exchange. Eric, before we sign off, tell the people where to find you and where to find your work.
Everything that I have my hands in rolls up into my Twitter page. That is at FantasyNav. The overwhelming majority of that work also lives here on the QB List. Mentioned I'm part of the rankings team, putting out some week early stashes to target as first come, first serve waivers come around, or just guys to stash and hold. Looking at some defenses, looking at some fool's gold players that you should be looking to sell high. All kinds of content of mine is living over in the broader QB List universe.
Beautiful. And you can find me at Fade That Man on social media. Find me in the QB List Discord. Very active there. A lot of us are very active there. Very accessible network of analysts and writers and talent. One of the best fantasy football communities out there. If you haven't looked into it yet, please do. Highly encourage you to check out what QB List has to offer. Thanks again for joining us on Ball Street. For Eric, I'm Brett. It's been a wonderful week 7. We'll see you again after week 8. Catch you later.